I'm going to be talking about a couple of different subjects. One is about endless debates, and the other is uh, Jesus in the Quran. So I hope you will take a thing or two from this. Okay, so what are endless debates? I mean, normally it so happens that in a discussion between theist and non-theist, especially atheist, if the discussion proceeds for a good length of time, the theists may keep on insisting on their position to have faith in God, but the atheists would come back with an answer telling them these are endless debates. There's no point arguing over endlessly, and so uh, there's let's call it a day. Let's close it. There's no point continuing any further, right? So this is at best an excuse from the atheists, in my experience, in my personal experience. I will give you a simple analogy of a game of chess. You know, in the game of chess, if you don't know the moves, or if you don't know the line of attack or defense, chess players would resort to moves that are drawish. So they would prefer to draw the game rather than risking a win. So, but if you were to play with higher ELO players, those players would know the lines, would know the moves, and as such would not resort to drawing moves. So they would end the battle with a decisive win because they have the knowledge. Something like this. Atheists, if they had the knowledge, they would end the debate, okay? And theists, if they had the knowledge, they would win the debate, right? And give a decisive blow to the atheist, right? It can't go endlessly forever because there's objective falsehood and there's objective truth. This debate cannot go endlessly forever, right? Mark it a point. This is a very important point. Bear that in the mind. So if at any point in time an atheist would come up with an excuse that these debates are endless, you got to really question his knowledge. Okay, so bear that in the mind. What I would like to say here is the premise of atheists about religion, about the people of faith, is somewhat like this. They think because a God does not exist, there's no way these scriptures could have been given from this God who does not exist. So as such, these scriptures are man-made, and hence this is falsehood, myths at best, has got no particular relevance to the natural world. So it should be really a fool's job to have faith in them and to believe in them and stuff like that. So basically, they conclude, based on their assumption, which is their premise, if you should say. So based on their assumption, they conclude that this is foolishness to have faith in this God, or in the books, what the religious people call as scriptures and etc. Right? So essentially, they are telling people who have faith in God are foolish. Right? So as a man of faith, in the Quran and the books that were given before the Quran and the prophets that were sent before Muhammad, right, from the same God, as a man of faith, to buy into this assertion or claim that atheists are making, that it is a fool's job to believe and have faith in these books and in this God who does not really exist, naturally I tend to have some questions to you before I concede that I was foolish in the past. And if those answers from you are convincing, then I might as well undergo transition or deconversion to embrace truth and convincing evidence, right? But during this time, if instead of supplying those convincing answers, if you disengage, calling it endless debates or whatever your motives are to disengage, I would see that as unfair treatment of my questions and of my rights. I have the natural right to ask a few questions and to launch an inquiry before I concede that I was foolish in the past. But if you do not engage, if you disengage, citing whatever excuse you would come up with, call it endless debates or call it um, whatever, then I would naturally conclude, first of all, like the analogy that I gave you of a chess match, that you don't have the knowledge. Second, you are unfair. Because you don't have the knowledge, you're not able to supply convincing evidence and arguments. And as such, you're unfair, you're dismissing me, you're disengaging with me, and this is an unfair behavior. And as such, you lack morals and ethics. You're bereft of morals and ethics, would be my natural and obvious conclusion if you were to disengage as an atheist, right? So, I think I've made my point loud and clear. Those who assert or claim that God is false need to provide justification or substantiation, if you would call it, upon inquiry by theists to convince them, as you're convinced yourself, of God being false. So you have to deliver that knowledge with which you're convinced that God of Abraham in specific is falsehood. So you have to be able to convince and share that knowledge that you have in your mind that makes you or forces you to think that God of Abraham is false. So you should really transfer that knowledge to theists, answering all of their inquiries, and then you would be a fair person with morals and ethics, and you wouldn't be shaming yourself. If you budge, if you disengage, that will obviously be evidence against you to conclude that you're unfair, you don't have knowledge, you don't have morals, and you lack basic ethics of engagement and making claim. So that's my position and that's my question to fans of MythVision. And if you guys are watching, or if you guys come across this video, take this message to your fan clubs, to your club, to MythVision, and have them think about this question. Okay, and obviously Derek is a wonderful person. I can only speak good about him, and all the sorts of experts that he brings on his channel. They're wonderful people with their years of research, a job that's not really easy to do. So I appreciate all of their work. And I have to make a comment here that all of these experts who have exposed the Bible, not the entirety, of course, but stories where it's cited for mimesis or having borrowed elements of the stories from earlier myths and works of, literature, from the epics of Iliad and from the tablets of Mesopotamia or whatever it is. So those experts who are calling their guns on the Bible need to understand that they have to actually aim at the Quran. The analogy that I gave you, if you want to defeat and kill the concept of Abrahamic God, then you are better off striking at the head, which is the Quran, rather than striking at an arm, which is not a decisive blow and which is not detrimental, okay, which is not going to kill a person if you strike at the arm. But instead, you must aim at the head with a decisive blow that you kill this God of Abraham. And that is the Quran, okay? And I emphasize this challenge again and again so that the experts wake up to tackle the Quran. But the excuse that people come up with, the fans, they were commenting on my previous video. The excuse they come up with, oh, in Western society, we don't have enough experts who know the language of the Quran to be able to criticize it. Oh, I'm sorry. I got to raise my hand here. I'm saying, I'm sorry. You don't know. The radical polemics and criticism of the Quran has been from the Christian world, Western Christian world, mostly from America and Europe. Okay, Christians in the past have criticized Quran and Muhammad like out of proportion. Like there's so much material written to criticizing Islam and Muhammad in the past. You would, if you were to find, I mean, if you sit down to Google it, you'll be amazed. But I have to concede to the good nature of modern researchers who are fair minded. They're not like their peers in the past who misled their pupil, even after benefiting from their tax paid and funded projects. They were totally unfair to their people and they did not appraise them of the truth of Islam and the Quran, unlike today, who are a lot better people, I should say, and are fair-minded people, such as Richard Bulliet, Casangrada, Sean Anthony, Margian Van Putten, Fred M. Donner, and the likes of those. And there are some, wonderful people, Holland and um, other sorts of people whom I don't recall at this point in time on top of my mind. But these are wonderful people who have only given submissions about Islam, about the accuracy of its origins. Like Margin Van Putten and Sean Anthony, they conclude Quran to be, around 640, which is very close to Prophet's lifetime. And the writings of the Quran, the script and its evolution, and dating the papyri, they conclude these sort of facts. These are only submissions, guys. What I'm saying is these people are fair-minded, they're true to their work, and they're only submitting their humble submissions about the Quran and its Islamic origins, right? So there is talent, there is skill in the Western world to investigate and to call guns on the Quran, but so far only submissions. So far nothing decisive has been uncovered about the Quran like what they are doing to the Bible. Isn't that amazing? It is. It is amazing. I mean, what else do you want to conclude if Muhammad and his companions were to do this work from oral standpoint? Because at that point in time in 7th century, remember that the Bible was not written in Arabic. There was no Arabic written Bible. And Quran itself became the first Arabic literary work ever to exist. The first. And you see the evolution of the script. There's plenty of evidence in that field for linguists such as Margin Van Putten, right? So, what I'm saying is, for Muhammad and his companion to deal with it orally and then redact a literary masterpiece such as the Quran, it's unbelievable. It's beyond human comprehension. And not to repeat, not to copy, and to omit and filter out all of the mistakes that experts catch on the Bible today, that's a non human feat. That's a non human feat. Think about it for yourselves. Think about it. And this is evidence of God when He says, I'm guarding the scripture. The Quran is a protected scripture. God is guarding it, right? And He'll do it until doomsday, right? Look at this verse. That's the slide on the screen. The Quran talks about itself as being immune to falsehood. It's immune, it's protected, it's immune to falsehood from all sides and angles. The falsehood does not enter it. That's why, you know what do people do? Critics do, especially in the modern day. They latch on to hadiths and they bring all sorts of nonsense that's there in those books to malign Islam and to caricature in a bad way the image of the prophet of God, the final prophet, the messenger of God. They bring all sorts of things that are written in hadith from an illiterate people back then who and a people who just became Muslims. You know, imagine in 7th century Islam expands rapidly and gains vast territories. The demographics of those territories were Christians and Jewish people and of pagan origins. And all of these people, when they become Muslim, they embrace the new faith, but they don't cleanse themselves with the Quran. They tend to carry their baggage, the Jewish baggage, the Christian baggage, knowledge that they were learnt with. And it became easy for them to include that in Islamic tradition because Islam basically, the Quran basically highlighted the same stories of the prophets, beginning with Adam and Eve, Noah, Enoch, Abraham, Moses, Aaron, David, Solomon, Samuel, and all of the prophets, with Zechariah, Mary, Jesus, John the Baptist. So it became easy for them to transmit their knowledge, their baggage essentially, to new Muslim people in the name of Islam. So they just transfer their knowledge in the name of Islam, and that knowledge goes on to become the books of hadith. Okay. And what happens? Guess what happens? There's a lot of absurdities in it. There's a lot of stuff that raises your eyebrows, okay, and makes you skeptical about it. This is not coming from the Prophet, because most of this content in those hadith books is in direct conflict with the teachings of the Quran. Direct contradiction, direct conflict. So what do you do? What do you decide? Did Prophet Muhammad give these conflicting teachings, and one set of teaching he preserved in the book called Quran, and conflicting teachings he preserved in the books called Hadith? No way. No way. Islam stopped with the Quran. That's where Islam stops. So if you are relying on the books of Hadiths to criticize Islam, it's a waste of effort. It's a total waste of effort. It's got no substance. It's got no credibility, I should say, to discredit the Quran. The Hadiths come nowhere close to the Quran to be able to elucidate it. Nowhere. It's just impossible, right? The Quran, the revelations, the relays that came from God gave cables that He relayed to Prophet Muhammad, and those wires became the contents of the Quran, and they stopped with Prophet Muhammad's demise. and that's the end of it. That's where you read the religion. And if you want to critique, that's the book you got to tackle, not the books of hadith. All right. Okay. I think I've made my point loud and clear. And that's the verse. That's the go to verse. It is immune from falsehood from all sides, and it stands sealed against falsehood. A cable from the wise God with a strong arm and the praiseworthy, one of a kind, exemplary. This is God, and this is God's word. Don't play with it. I mean, if Muslims do that, don't buy it. You're not. You don't buy. You don't buy stuff like that, right? Americans are smart people. Westerners are smart people. You don't buy things like that, right? You buy credible things. So when it comes to religion, treat religion the same way as you deal in your world. You don't buy stuff, dubious stuff from the marketplace. So don't buy anything else other than the Quran. Examine it, tackle it, and then you will come up with arguments that are credible. You know what I mean? So even if you want to criticize Muhammad or the Quran, that's what you do. You read the Quran, you tackle it head on, and and from there you maneuver your arguments, not from sources that came centuries later, and these are mere allegations with no way in the world to ascertain their truth and their belonging and their reference to Prophet Muhammad, right? So I think the point is loud and clear. And yeah, and I would like to briefly talk about Jesus in the Quran. In short, Jesus has been given the title in the Quran as Ruhullahi wa Kalimatuhu. That is, he is the spirit from God and his word turned into flesh. Jesus had a miracle birth. There's no need to clamor. Uh, these sort of miracles are a scientific phenomenon, actually, to say so, in a different taxa of species, like the Hymenoptera, right? The insects and the bees. They don't need contribution of genes from males to develop their gametes into embryos, right? So the females can do without the males to produce it's mostly female offspring, right? So they don't need male gametes to be able to do that. So when they do acquire male gametes and they process them in their ovaries, in their wombs, to create male offspring, right? So this is called parthenogenesis. But the miracle here, which is a rarity, is to happen among vertebrates, among humans, and to result in a male, right? So that's the miracle. So God is capable of doing it. God has been capable of abiogenesis when nothing, no life, no trace of life existed on planet Earth. He created life, living cells from non-existence into existence, abiogenesis, right? God can do that. So God does miracles. The science of it, which we don't understand at the moment. It's science, but we don't understand at the moment. So hence it's a mystery to us. And there's a lot of those sort of mysteries in the natural world that we interface with. There's a lot of phenomenon that we can't really explain, which is mystery to us at this point in time. But in the future, if God deems fit to us for us to know, He will give the knowledge of it, and then we will understand its happenings, right? It'll become part of science then, right? So it's like in the olden days, if you were to tell people we could go to space, they would say it's fiction, but today it is science. So it's just like that. So Jesus had a miracle birth, and during his ministry, he also performed miracles. God gave him the title Ruhullahi the Spirit of God and gave him the miracle to raise the dead back to life. Right? So his title is Ruhullah, the Spirit of God. So God gives the title to Abraham, Khalilullah, which is the friend of God. Because what Abraham did was unprecedented. Abraham's background was pagan. His dad was making idols and worshipping idols. Abraham rose from those ranks and reasoned faith in the God, looking at the artistry in the cosmos. So Abraham, in my book, is the peer astronomer. In my book, Ancient Astronomy, Allah's Narrative, I bring up this story of Abraham and show you and demonstrate him being an astronomer, a peer astronomer. So he reasoned faith in God, looking at the artistry in the celestial space. Moses gets the title Kalimullah, like he spoke to God direct, like without actually seeing God, but he had a conversation with God without needing Angel Gabriel, right? So the Quran comes up with these titles to different prophets for their different traits that God gave them. Okay, what about death that we see on this image here? Did Jesus really die according to the Quran? I should say he had an unearthly death, but was he crucified? The answer the Quran gives is وَمَا سَلَبُوهُ. No, he was not crucified. وَلَكِنْ شُبِّهَ لَهُمْ. What the Quran says is, but they highly suspect that to be the case. The Jews wanted to kill Jesus. They had already killed his peer, John the Baptizer, John the Baptist. They had already killed him because he was becoming way bigger than they could tolerate. So they had authority confrontation with people who were becoming way bigger than they were, the temple priests. They could not tolerate people like that. So they were bribing the Roman officials to hold their positions in the temple. It was fairly complex to hold to power in that society. It was fairly complex. So they could not see somebody coming and shining with authority and the people are flocking to him in large numbers. They could not tolerate it. So they colluded with Herod. And what we see in the gospel is a glimpse of what actually happened, and probably a misstatement to say John was killed because he criticized Herod's affair. The story is actually bigger than that. They could not stand John the Baptizer come to fame and glory. Hence they colluded, the temple priests and Herod, to massacre John. They had already massacred his father, Zechariah, right? Because he came up with this amazing authority and had this miracle sort of son, conceiving of his own son because he was aged and his wife had been barren until that time. And they sought the right opportunity to kill Zechariah when he brings Mary with his miracle child into the holy chamber in the temple. So they cite, because they did not accept Mary to have a miracle birth, to have a child out of miracle birth. So they said, you have desecrated the holy chamber by bringing in Mary, who was not a virgin anymore, and they made a case against Zechariah and they killed him. So Jesus was very much in the radar. Their radar was always, scanning Jesus. And Jesus, when they killed John, we see in the Gospels, Jesus goes out of Jerusalem, out of their, vengeance, and the timing was right for Jesus to get arrested as well. But he wasn't really famous back then, so in a way, Jesus realized the dangers and he just moved out of Jerusalem and stuff like that. But later on, he comes back after having lit the sky space of Israel and Judea with his miracles, and he got a large following in Jerusalem. And it became daunting for the priests over there to tackle him. And yeah, he came into the radar. They wanted to kill him. They were after the opportunity. So when finally Jesus prays, falls on his face to the ground, prays to the Lord in the Garden of Gethsemane, and he says, "Remove this cup from me if it's possible, God. Not my will, but your will." So the night he's praying on the mount, and the Pharisees and Sadducees, that basically the temple priests, show up with the temple guards to arrest him, and all of the disciples flee him. So God calls it the end of the ministry of Christ. And he says, "I'll do what has been promised. A second disciplinary action will be invoked against this people. So, as such, it's time." And God said to Jesus, "I will give you an unearthly death." That means you won't die on this earth to be buried in this earth, but rather I'll pick you up unto myself, which means that angels escorted Jesus into the celestial space. And on Judgment Day, he's going to come back, when God is going to come for judgment with his magnificent throne showing up in the celestial space, and angels and Jesus will descend on earth and start the process of judgment. So that's the story of Jesus in the Quran. And I think you've taken a thing or two. So don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell button so that you know when I'm live, and you can join the live stream with me and have a conversation, and we can talk more about all of these things that you don't know about the Quran, but you should know. Okay, you should know. You guys should know. You guys are entitled to know Quran firsthand. All right, and I'm here to help you. Anything you want to know about the Quran, I'm here to help you. So subscribe, hit the bell button, and just be ready to join the live stream when I'm live, and we can have a wonderful conversation. So see you until then. Bye.